Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Great Shot, Kid, the podcast on the Nerd Party Network that looks at the artistic and technical inspirations of Star Wars creators and looks at the larger picture of the behind-the-scenes work. I'm John.
I'm Mike.
And this week we are going to continue our series looking at the shots that define the Star Wars aesthetic with a focus this week on the prequel trilogy. Before we get into that, just wanted to mention, of course, that we're at thenerdparty.com. You can find the show there. You can also go to nerdparty.com/contact and you can select the show. If you drop us a line through that, an email comes to me and Mike, we can respond to you. You can find the show as part of the network Twitter handle at Join Nerd Party. You can find us over on Facebook at facebook.com/The Nerd Party and on Instagram as The Nerd Party. If you want to grab our special attention, use the hashtag #GreatShotKid, and that'll send a special alert to one of the two of us so that we can get your feedback directly. So, going into the aesthetic of the prequel trilogy, Mike. Last week, we had our definitions of the aesthetic for the Star Wars original trilogy. You rightly pointed out lived in universe. I called it documentary fiction. And so I guess the first question out of the gate is, for the prequel trilogy, do you think that the aesthetic held, or do you think that the aesthetic changed?
I would say it definitely changed as a result of a number of things. The main one, well, all falling under the umbrella of technology, you know. I mean, it's pretty well documented that he said that the reason why he waited so long to make the prequels was because he wanted to do things which were technically impossible to do back in the 80s. I think that we see that manifest itself in different ways throughout this trilogy. And I think that, it's because of that, the look of these movies is substantially different from the look of the original trilogy.
So you don't think that the lived-in aesthetic holds true, or did you see it creeping in at any point? Did you see any sort of adjustment to the aesthetic as it went through?
I think he was trying to do it. I think the problem that he ran into, in a sense, and I mean, he's tried to justify it in certain ways. I mean, there's two things going on. One, since it's all being built from scratch, there is more of an artificial nature to it, and I know the original was all built from scratch too, but it was built from scratch in such a way that there was still this connection to reality. For example, making lightsaber handles out of camera parts instead of, having them, manufactured by machines, and making a spaceport out of, garbage that you would find in, a car graveyard or something like that, instead of doing it in something which has been completely planned out months in advance or years in advance and created digitally. I think by its nature, there's a bit of chaos which is sort of introduced to doing things the way that they did them in the original trilogy. And even if you want to add that sort of like layer of lived in, whether it's dirt or wear and tear on top of whatever it is you created, there's still only so much that you can do and have it sort of have that effect. So I don't know. I think that's kind of where the aesthetic changed. And I think the other place where it changed in terms of like the photography is that he definitely sort of took an approach of placing the camera wherever he wanted to without regard to reality, in a sense. It was kind of the same approach that Orson Welles took with Citizen Kane, coming up with place. And I mean, Robert Zemeckis does this all the time too. And by doing that, you gain an interesting perspective on reality, and yet you lose that documentary feel because the whole time you're thinking, how are you going to put a camera there?
Sure.
Or how are you going to put a camera there if you're a documentary filmmaker or whatever? So I think those two things really led to a shift in the style of this, in addition to the fact that he fully embraces the aesthetic qualities of digital photography. He's not trying to make it look like film, just with only cheaper or whatever. He went full on into digital and said, like, this is a better looking thing, and I'm going to embrace that and alter the style of the movies in order to reflect it.
Sure.
So all of those things, to me, led to a very different look for the prequels than for the originals.
I don't disagree with you. I dropped the word documentary from my description of the aesthetic. So what is your description of the aesthetic for the prequels?
My description of the aesthetic for the prequels is, if I had to choose like one word.
One word or a phrase. We were allowed to have, a phrase before if we wanted to. It doesn't have to be just one word.
I'm going to go with digital. I think there's a lot of things that fall under that, but I think when I think of the aesthetic of the prequels, I think digital.
Okay. Not Bobby Digital, like the RZA released years ago, but just digital. Okay.
Yes.
For me, I don't refute what you're saying. I agree, obviously, that he embraced the technology, that he felt unrestrained in terms of what he was now able and allowed to introduce into things. And I would actually use the phrase photographic hyperreality for the aesthetic that he uses in the prequels. And for me, I know what shots reflect that, because it was sort of lurking in the back of my mind. I didn't have the terminology for it, but then there was some interview along the way where I believe it was McCallum in an interview mentioned some of the Western frontier painters that were influencing Lucas's aesthetic for the prequel trilogy. And it suddenly clicked from an art history class that I'd taken where we covered that time period and how hyper reality was their whole goal, was to make it like there was a whole wave of artists where they weren't just trying to depict going out into the West and settling. They were trying to sell it. It was almost like propaganda for wagon trains to say, wow, look at this. This is the best majesty you could possibly see. And in those paintings, it's reality, but it's turned up a notch in terms of its hues and its saturations and everything that's going on in the painting itself. And I think that very much is there in the prequel aesthetic. So we're at The Phantom Menace with our first pick for shots. And so I'm really curious, what about The Phantom Menace? What shot in The Phantom Menace, if you had to pick one, defines your aesthetic for you?
The big thing for me with The Phantom Menace, the thing that I kind of took away from it as being, sort of like what made that movie work as well as it did back in the day and even now, is the idea of world building, the idea of doing things that you couldn't do before, and really sort of eliminating limitations in a sense, and
Sure.
Just sort of going all out for it and creating worlds, with new creatures and new environments and new everything, and being able to put the camera wherever you want and not having to worry about figuring out how, because 9 times out of 10 it's a virtual camera or whatever in a lot of ways. So for me, the shot which defines episode 1 and maybe even the prequels on the whole is the shot where they are flying in their little shuttle from their ship that had just landed on Coruscant to their hotel or whatever, wherever they were going. And you really get to see all of Coruscant in all of its glory, I guess, for the first time. That to me is the definition of the look of episode 1.
Okay. I can see that. And it definitely speaks to digital, because there was some model stuff in use, but it was very much heavily replicated. And then the larger background, I think that's a good shot to define things, because it very clearly defines the move away from the artist's paintbrush that made those backgrounds, those extended backgrounds, into the computer that made those extended backgrounds. So I could definitely see that. For me, I actually wind up with a shot that has probably the least amount of digital manipulation of something in Phantom Menace, or outside of, like Anakin running in the desert or something. But, well, even that has Darth Maul behind him. But anyway, it's actually a shot that was in the trailers, the original trailers for it. And it's a shot where Padme is on Coruscant in Palpatine's chambers, and she's got the two handmaidens in red on her sides behind her, and she's got the kabuki makeup on, and she's got the hairdo with the gold headdress on it, and she's wearing this very Japanese inspired gray and cream colored ensemble, and then behind her is this perfect circle that's perfectly framing her head, and then beyond that is the balcony with Coruscant out beyond it. And when I look at that shot, it belongs in Star Wars, but at the same time it represents what I think is what Lucas ultimately wanted to go for with the evolution of technology, which was, and speaking to your virtual camera comment, the ability to create this perfect shot. There is no doubt that when I look at that picture, this is somebody who painstakingly went back to his photographer roots and created a picture. It was about that still picture and about that composition. And this is something that I could see in an art gallery somewhere where somebody had this picture, this futuristic picture of something. And so for me, that speaks to that aesthetic for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I guess I can see that in a lot of ways. It really does kind of go against the documentary thing from the earlier movies. But yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so we've got our shots from the Phantom Menace. I find it interesting that neither one of us picked anything from the Jedi Council chambers. Mm-hmm. Was that ever in contention for you?
I guess I hadn't really thought of it, no. But in a lot of ways, I guess that would work because it's showing an expansion of the story, because like the original movies really sort of did a good job of showing how big the universe is by finding the little nooks and crannies, and kind of like showing sort of the diversity in that galaxy. Whereas with the prequels, it was really about, the sort of like epic hero shots. It was about, and I mean that in the sense of like, this is something that you would see on the news. These were like the landmarks of the galaxy. We were finally seeing all of this. It wasn't like the back alleys. It was the capitals and everything. And, the Jedi Council, I think, represents that. And the other thing that the Jedi Council represents, which I think is indicative of this style, is a wide variety of creatures, both practical and CGI. And that obviously is something that he really embraced with Episode 1 as well.
Well, I mean, it's something that I think since the original film, he's constantly trying to redress how disappointed he was with the cantina. Everybody knows all the stories by this point where the guy got sick and then none of the stuff matched it exactly. And so you see Jabba's palace as his attempt to say cantina, but bigger. And then in a sense, even the Jedi Council chamber is a reflection of cantina, but bigger. And so, yeah. Okay, so we get to probably the film of the series that is most treated like a redheaded stepchild, and that is going to be Attack of the Clones, which I personally love. I've loved it since I saw it. Some people question my sanity because of that. But going forward, where do you land on a single shot to demonstrate the aesthetic for the prequel trilogy out of Attack of the Clones?
This one was really hard nailing down a single shot, because I think there's a lot of shots which represent what, the look of this movie means to me. And, just like Episode 1 was pushing forward in terms of technology with CGI and stuff like that, I think Episode 2 is pushing forward in terms of technology, with it being obviously the first one shot digitally. And one of the things which struck me from the very first time I saw that trailer on 35 millimeter was how colorful everything was and how sharp everything looked, and how devoid of grain it was and everything like that. And like, if I were to think of a shot which represents that more than anything, I mean, this is going to sound like a completely bizarre, nothing shot, but it's the shot of R2 in Padme's room at night when he's, guarding her as she sleeps. Yeah. Because you have like these, very, very saturated blues. You've got the lights coming off of R2's, head. It is a practical shot, or most of it is anyway. And by choosing that, you really get to see like the texture on this, lived in, robot like you haven't seen before, because it's been in some ways obscured by grain. I don't mean that as a knock on film or anything like that, but it was a much less noisy image, and it really made me look at this thing which we've seen for 4 movies now. This is the 5th one in a different light, and literally. And I think that shot, to me, and also I think it was in the trailer, so maybe that's why it always stands out to me, but that shot to me represents the aesthetic of episode 2.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful shot. I think there are a lot of very beautiful shots in Attack of the Clones. There are a lot that I could gravitate toward as I was actually looking through screenshots online and trying to select one. I looked at there's the shot of Dooku first walking into the chamber where Obi-Wan is floating in his invisible harness, basically, and you have that last shot, which I think would speak just as much to your digital observations of the troops assembled on the ground at the end. That was also in the trailer, where I remember the first time I saw it, it took my breath away because I thought it was just so gorgeous. Like I was like, oh, look at it, it's so beautiful. Coming back to the sort of hyper reality, though, I lean toward the shot of Anakin riding the swoop bike with the sun setting behind him, because that looks directly out of one of those Western hyper realistic paintings. It really it looks like one of those paintings come to life, but with a futuristic bike in it. But where I wound up, and this might be an odd way, maybe it should be the sunset one. I don't know what it is, but the shot that jumped out at me was Dex and Obi-Wan. It's a side shot. You see both of them sitting at the table in the diner, talking to each other. And for me, in that one shot, it's just like the one of Padme that I mentioned for The Phantom Menace, where everything is just painstakingly arranged and perfect, and it's exactly the way it's supposed to look, and you can tell how composed it is. But at the same time, you see almost every influence on George Lucas's life in that one shot, and it again to me becomes this hyper reality. You have this creature here that was lurking somewhere in the artistic abyss, and somebody designed, and Lucas said, oh no, I've seen that guy in a dream somewhere, and wouldn't it have been neat if he was talking with me in a diner, and this is the type of diner I went in as a kid, and here's the coffee cup and the napkin dispenser, and here's the neon sign in the window, and it's almost like he has attenuated his own memory in this shot. And I think that's probably why I land on it. But very close contention is the one of Anakin going through the landscape trying to find his mom.
That Anakin landscape one always stuck out to me because I used to go on this like home theater forum. I think it was called the Home Theater Forum, to be honest. And this was like right at the advent of like HD TVs and stuff like that. And I was really sort of like, I was like, I want a 16:9 TV. Like, I saw storyboards for the Genndy Tartakovsky Clone Wars, and I saw that it was in 16:9. And I'm like, my goal is to have a 16:9 TV by the time this thing is shown on TV. And
you got to have goals, Mike.
Yep. And then, like one of the people who kept on posting in the thread for this one TV, which I was researching extensively, had that image as like his tag image. so I'd see it every time he posted, and for some reason it like stuck in my head, and like that was one of the first things that I put on when I got my HD TV. Like that was like the definition of what an HD image was when I got my new TV.
That's cool. I'm surprised it wasn't the one that they had on the DVD for Attack of the Clones that was supposed to be your THX tuning image. Do you remember? That was of Obi-Wan on Geonosis with his Jedi Starfighter. Okay. That was how you're supposed to. You went through the whole THX thing. Adjust your light level until it's this, and adjust this until it's this. And if you can see the gray box, then it's wrong, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Which was always maddening because you'd adjust it for Attack of the Clones, and then you'd put on one of your other movies, and it wouldn't look right. It was just, it was frustrating for me.
But, you needed to really go with the Digital Video Essentials disc, which was set to reference levels across the board, unlike the THX one, which was like each disc is different, and it's like, well, it shouldn't be. You guys should have standards in the industry. You should be able to do this once and never have to do it again. But
yes,
whatever.
I agree.
You gotta sell your product, I guess. Whatever.
I guess. Okay, so those are our shots for Attack of the Clones, which brings us to, for this episode, our topping shot. The shot from Revenge of the Sith that defines the aesthetic of the prequels.
I'm kind of thinking we're going to have the same shot here. I mean, this to me was by far the easiest because it seems the most obvious for a lot of reasons. But it's the shot where Anakin and Obi-Wan's blades cross and the big, lava thing shoots up in the back and everything like that. Like the sort of like, I don't know, climax of that moment in that fight. Right? You know what I'm talking about?
I do know exactly what you're talking about, and it was definitely one of the ones that I my finger hovers on. And the only other one I would put in, I think I do agree with you, because it was a real volcano erupting that they morphed into this thing where they're on a walkway that doesn't exist when they're really in a sound stage. But I think that we do converge on that. The only one that I would throw out there as a secondary contention is there's another shot from roughly the same time during the film where they jump down onto this pipe that of course doesn't exist, and you see in the shot Obi-Wan, his feet are in the foreground, and Anakin is balancing himself with his saber held out backwards, and you can see that they're doing this balancing act, and it's such a convincing, incredible shot where you in the back of your mind, because you watch the behind the scenes stuff, it's just two guys on a green floor with a green room standing within these painted guidelines, and then you look at it and it looks like two guys fighting with lightsabers over a chasm. But I do think the more identifiable one, and the one that definitely speaks to both the hyperrealism and the digital, is having that volcano go off in the background while they are attacking. So 6 movies and we finally converge on a shot. So I'd say that's an accomplishment.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing about that shot, the reason why I think it really speaks to it is, for one thing, it's an update of the shot that we had in episode 6, right? I mean, where Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker cross lightsabers or whatever. But whereas that one was in a room with, in front of a guy, and it was like in the foreground, and the close-up was of the guy. This is, the culmination of this for this prequel trilogy, but also, in a lot of ways, the entire franchise, sort of the thing that we've been waiting for. And obviously, it's a mirror of episode 6. It rhymes, and the fact that it's the same thing, only on a much larger scale, with a whole bunch of crazy, weird stuff all composited together to make like this epic moment out of what was a really small moment first time around. I think really, kind of speaks to what it was he was doing with the prequel trilogy compared to the original trilogy.
Yeah. I would be very interested to know if our shots have landed on the mark. If they are great shots for all you kids out there, or if you have feedback. We got some feedback on the last show. We very much appreciate it. As aforementioned, you can reach out to us through all of those different channels. This is the part of the show lately where we would typically go into the next chapter of Splinter of the Mind's Eye. But we want to give you crazy kids an opportunity to catch up, as it were, because I know that we started and we got underway, and so we're taking a breather this week so that everybody can catch up, and we're going to get back into Splinter of the Mind's Eye next week with Chapter 3. So read Chapters 1 and 2, catch up, and we will get to Chapter 3 next week. While they are reading up on Splinter of the Mind's Eye, Mike, where can they find you online?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Mumbles3K, and you can also find me on CommentaryTrackStars.com doing a show called Commentary Track Stars, and you can find me on Trek.fm doing a show called The Edge and another show called Stage 9 with you.
Yes, Stage 9 with me over on Trek FM, where we are knee-deep in Discovery Fever, looking at the creators of the latest chapter of the Star Trek saga. You can also find me back here on the Nerd Party co-hosting Aggressive Negotiations, a different kind of Star Wars show with Matthew Rushing. And you can find me out there in the wild co-hosting Words with Nerds with my pal Craig, which is just some zaniness that we whip up from week to week. And if you would care to interact with me online, look for Kessel Junkie. That's my name on pretty much every social network you would care to interact with me on. So we will see you next week on Great Shot Kid as we delve into not just Alan Dean Foster's next chapter, Chapter 3 in Splinter of the Mind's Eye, but also shots from the non-Lucas Star Wars movies that define the aesthetic and see if it has changed there yet.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.